Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. In this video, we're going to be talking about the OpenAI speech-to-text endpoint, which will allow us to transcribe audio into text. And we're going to be doing it with the help of this new audio recorder app, which I recently released to the Wix app market, so that when we hit save just like that, it transcribes the text. And if you want to learn how to do all that and more, let's get started. Okay, so here we are back in the playground, and like with most of our OpenAI tutorials, we are going to be starting in backend. So let me just give you an overview of what I have set up already and what our starting point is going to be. So I have a backend file, a new one that I created called speech to text. If you haven't created it yet, then you can just click this plus button and add in a new file. And this is where we're going to be writing the backend for our interaction with OpenAI. And again, what we're doing here today is we are going to take audio generated by the user, and we are going to send that to OpenAI to get a transcription of it. So we're going to get text back of what we had in that audio. And in order to facilitate that, what I've done is I have first uploaded a file here to my media. So if you go here to media and show more, then you'll see here that I have an MP3 file uploaded that's called Wix Demo MP3. And that's the file that I'm going to be using initially to test out my backend before we move to the front-end interface, which allows the user to actually create the audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and grab the URL for that file. Okay, so if I grab this URL and I'm just going to paste it over here inside of my backend file. And if I put this in the browser, then you can see that it'll just take me to an audio player. And this is just me recording one sentence that you're going to see soon what it actually says when we transcribe it. But this is what we're going to be using for testing out our backend. The last thing that we'll need in terms of setup is we'll need to have the Axios package. So if you haven't done so yet in the previous tutorials, you're going to want to go over here to npm and make sure to install the Axios package. Okay, and if you have all that ready, then we can hop in and start writing out our function. And this function is going to be calling this create transcription endpoint. So this is part of the audio endpoints, and it's create transcription, and this essentially takes the audio and turns it into text. And this endpoint, personally, this is an opinion, is the most complicated endpoint that OpenAI currently has, especially from a Wix standpoint. And that's because the content type is multi-part form data, which is always the hardest to work with from the Wix side. And also because we have to pass in a file here and not, let's say, a URL or some text or something a little more simple. So those are all things that we're going to talk about and see how we can overcome using essentially the Axios package. So let me head over here back to the back end of our site, and I'm going to throw this into a constant. First, let me zoom in so that you can see what I'm doing. Zoom in one more. Awesome. So first I'm going to throw this into a variable, so const file URL equals to, and we're going to be using that later on. And we're going to have to do our imports. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to import Axios from the package. Whoops. And I'm going to import getSecret. And this is going to help us get our API key from the secrets manager, Wix backend, secrets backend. Great, so now let's create our function. So it's going to be export async function. And I'll call this generate text from audio. And later on, this is going to take a parameter of an audio file. But for now, since we're going to be using this file URL, I'm just going to leave it empty here in terms of params. So what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to have the endpoint of this API. So let me go ahead and copy it from right over here. Oops. Got it. And I'm going to paste that here. And we're also going to need our API key, which we're going to get using get secret. And here I'm going to put the name of my API key, which again might not be the name of your API key. But yeah, so don't just write exactly what I'm writing, but actually think about what needs to go in there. Because if you didn't call it OpenAI API key, then it won't work. Okay, so we have the endpoint and we have the API key. And the next thing we're going to need to do, even before we post to this endpoint, is we're going to need to get the contents of our audio file. So we can't send in this URL directly, because as we saw, it takes a file, but we actually have to kind of download the contents and upload it as a file. And in order to do that, we're going to be using the Axios package. So let's set up that GET request that we're going to be doing with Axios. So I'm just going to say here const file response equals to await Axios. And there are a few different ways to set up these Axios requests. So here we're going to do it one way, and then later on we're also going to do it with a slightly different way, and both are okay. If you want to learn more about Axios, then I do recommend checking out the documentation, but basically it's just a wrapper for making HTTP requests. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call Axios, and then we are going to pass it an object, and this object is going to have information about the request that we're making. So first we're going to have the method, and this is going to be a GET request, because all we're doing is getting the information from that file. And we're going to have to pass in the actual URL, which we're making the request to, which is our file URL. And we're also going to need to specify the response type, and this is probably the key of this whole thing, and why we're also not using fetch, and that's because we want response type to be of buffer array. And this is essentially now a buffer of data that we can attach to our form, which we're going to be uploading to OpenAI. So the next step, as I said, is to create a form. And in order to do that, we're going to be using something called form data. So I'm just going to say here const form data equals to new form data. And this is now showing in red. And typically, so this is another challenge here that we're encountering because of Wix. So if I'm not mistaken, typically in a node environment, you would have this form data out of the box. But because we're in Wix, we're going to be needing to use a package in order to facilitate this form data here in the backend. So what it also might have to do with the versioning of the Node.js. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to install a package here. So I'm going to go here to packages, and I'm going to install an npm package, and it's going to be a package called form data. So this library right over here, I'm just going to go ahead and click install. And as you can see here, it's a library to create readable multi-part form data streams, which is exactly what we need here for OpenAI. And for the usage, we just need to import it inside of our backend here. So let me do that right over here. Whoops. So we could just say const form data equals to require form data. Awesome. And now we should see here on the bottom that we no longer have red squiggly lines, which we don't like. And we can begin to essentially create this form data. So what we're going to do is first we're going to append the file. So I'm going to say here form data dot append, and we're going to be appending a file, and it's going to be a buffer dot from. And this is essentially the data that's going to be part of that file. And we're going to be using our file response dot data. Okay, so that's what is actually going to be in the contents of the file. And the last thing I'm going to add in here is just a file name. And I'm just going to call it test audio. And this is going to be mp3 form, .mp3. Awesome. The next thing that we need to add here is also the model. Because if we go here to the OpenAI reference, then you can see here that we're submitting a form, and one of these parameters needs to be file, and the other one needs to be model. Okay, so this is also passed in here as part of the form data and not part of the body like we're usually used to with the other OpenAI endpoints. So that's just something to note, not to get confused over there. So we're going to be passing in form data dot append, and we're going to be appending the model. And the model that we're going to be appending is going to be Whisper 1, and you can probably find the information. Yeah, only Whisper 1 is currently available, and that's why that's the one that we're using. Did I spell it correctly? I think so. Okay, so now that we've appended the data to the form, we actually need to make our post request to OpenAI. And we're going to be doing this again with Axios. So what I'm going to be doing here is say const text response equals to, and this is going to be Axios dot post. And here we're going to pass in our endpoint, and we're going to pass in our form data, and we're going to pass in our headers. So here, in terms of headers, what we need to pass in is we need to pass in our authorization, and we need to pass in the headers from our form. So what we're going to do here is first we're going to have our authorization header. So let me grab that authorization header right over here. And I'm going to put it right here in headers. And obviously we need to do some touching up here. Let's change that and turn that into a template literal. And here we'll pass in our API key. That'll be right over there, API key. And we're also going to want to pass in whatever headers that we have from the form, which generally will include also this content type header because we're passing it in as a form. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to spread in our form data dot get headers. And don't forget to have a comma here. Awesome. And the last thing that we're going to do here from this function is we will return text response dot data. So the actual data that comes back from this request. Last thing I'm going to do before we do some testing is I'm going to throw this all into a try catch, just in case, for the likely case that I've made some kind of mistake. So we're going to have, whoops, try catch over here. And all of this will go into the try. And here I'll just have a log, which will catch any errors if we have them, console.log, error, error. Awesome. So let me format that, and we're ready to do our first test run. So let me go ahead and click right over here, and I'm going to hit run. Whoops. Okay, turned undefined. Let's see. Try that one more time. Okay, so it's coming back with undefined. Let's try and figure out why that is happening. Let's see. So here I have one problem where I don't have await. So let's put that in over there. So basically, basic promises over there. Let's go ahead and run. And now it's taking longer. Okay, request failed with status code 400. Back after my debugging session, and as usual, it was a matter of typos. So first of all, I had written a buffer array instead of array buffer. So that has been switched over. And the second thing is that I accidentally wrote file name with a capital N when it should just be file name all lowercase. So now that I've gotten those two things resolved, if we go over here to our kind of backend run here, then I can go ahead and run. And we get back this. Okay, hello, I hope you're having a great day. And that is a transcription of what was inside the recording inside of that MP3 file. So now that we have our backend function working, what we need to do is essentially get a URL to an audio file that we can pass from the front end to the back end and then get the transcription for the user. Here we are back on the front end in the playground, and you'll see that here, in addition to the text input that we were using earlier, I've added in this element that looks like an audio recorder, because it is an audio recorder. And this is the result of the fact that A, Wix does not have an element out of the box for recording audio, and B, that it required a rather complex process of sending the audio information to a third-party server in order to upload it temporarily and provide a file URL, etc., etc. That's not something that I managed to handle on the Wix side natively. So I decided to take all of those struggles and bundle it together into this app, which is also available here on the app market, audio recorder. And I'll be adding a link to this app as well as a coupon. For the first 100 of you that want to try it out, you will get the first month free, so that you can experiment with it and see if it solves your OpenAI needs or any other kind of Wix audio recording needs. And let me just give you a brief demo of how it works so that you'll know how to use it if you decide to. And if not, you will have to find some kind of way to record the audio and store it in a temporary file with the URL in order to pass to your backend. So that's also totally an option. But I'm going to go with this pre-made app just because it cuts through a lot of red tape that's kind of outside of the scope of this tutorial. So the way that this works is essentially it exposes a few events. So you can see here that I'm using currently the onSave event. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see better. And this will run when somebody saves the audio. So let me go ahead and publish that. And I'm going to head over to the live site here. And let me just show you what that event looks like once it fires off. So I'm going to go here to Inspect, Console, and I'm going to hit this button in order to start recording audio. And now I'm kind of recording and recording and recording. And then once I hit stop, so I have the option either to play back the recording, cancel, or save. And as soon as I hit this save button, then you can see here that it fired off that event. And this event has a bunch of stuff. And the important part here is the data. And this data includes a few things. So first of all, it includes a file. And I've noticed that there's a slight discrepancy between Editor X and Wix Classic. So let me just show you how this looks in Wix Classic. So this is the same recorder over here in Wix Classic. And you can see that inside of data, I have the actual file, which was uploaded to the Wix Media Manager directly through the app. Unfortunately, it seems like in Editor X, there's some kind of permissions issue. I've reported it to Wix. Hopefully it will be solved, maybe even before you download the app. But either way, we also have this URL here. And this URL is a temporary URL, so it lasts for about 60 seconds. And this is a URL to the recording, which is stored in an external server that you can also use in order to provide to OpenAI and create the transcription. You also have the option of using this URL with the internal Wix import file Velo API in order to upload it to your Wix Media Manager and store it permanently, depending on what kind of user experience you want to provide for the person. So I'm just going to be showing you how to use this temporary URL to directly send it to OpenAI and get the transcription back. And the same principle holds for any kind of URL that you'd obtain to your audio file. So what I'm going to do over here, I'm just going to head back to our front end. And whoops. What I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to, when we save from the audio recorder, I'm going to prompt this ask question function. And this is a function that we've built out in previous parts of this series. And basically what it does, it just does a few kind of UI things in terms of displaying things, hiding things, etc. And most importantly, it prompts whichever endpoint we've built for OpenAI. And that's going to be our generate text from audio function. And I've made one important change here, and that is that I'm passing in a URL parameter. And that is what we're using to get our file response instead of the generic file URL. Okay, so you're going to want to make that slight change to your backend function from what I showed you earlier. And once you've done that, we can just import this function on the front end. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to create an import from backend slash speech to text. And this is what we're going to be using here inside of the function. So I'm going to say const text response equals to await. And here we're going to have our generate text from audio, and we're going to pass in a URL, which we're going to also pass in as a parameter to this function. And once we get back this text response, I'm just going to say that const AI content, that's essentially what we're going to be displaying to the user, is equal to text response.text. And I'll just add in here also like a console log just to get the text response, just in case it doesn't come back as I expect. So I'll have kind of a fallback to make debugging a little easier later on. Awesome. Okay, and now we just need to call this ask question function. So I'm going to say const URL equals to event.data. Okay, that's what we have over here. If I just go back here to the console, hopefully I didn't refresh. Yeah, so here we have, this is the event, and this is data, and we want to tap into this URL right over here. So I'm just going to be taking that URL, and I'm going to say ask question URL. Awesome, so that should be enough to get us going. So let me go ahead and hit publish. And let's go to the live site. I'm going to refresh twice for good luck. And now we can start recording the audio. So I'm going to say, hi everyone, this is a tutorial explaining how to use OpenAI's Whisper endpoint in order to transcribe from audio into text. And I've stopped the recording. So now I'm just going to hit save. And now we got our temporary URL. We're sending it to OpenAI. And hopefully now it's transcribing. And you can see here, hi everyone, this is a tutorial explaining what I just said. So that worked. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. And again, if you want to try out using the app, then you just have to head over to the Wix App Market, download it, use your code, and you can try it out free for a month and see if you like it and if it's doing what you want. And we're going to wrap up here. So if you like this video, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.